Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Revival of America podcast. This is Jenny. I'm the owner and the host of the Revival of America. Today we have SG and Anon in the house, everybody. So please, if you have a question for SG, feel free to raise your hand or put your comment underneath his video on the wall over here on Telegram. And for those of you over there on Rumble, we are streaming live through Rumble. If you have a question for SG, please write your question in the comment area, and I will read those questions to SG once we get to that part in the show. Also, too, everybody, please be careful who you listen to, who you follow, what you're putting in your mind, because I'm telling you, it is awesome to see these people. The more they speak, the more they expose themselves. We are seeing it left and right in real time, and I'm so excited for those of you that are finally feeling a little bit more comfortable and who you should and should not follow. It's not the 3 to 5 people I used to say, guys. It's the 1 to 3. So, and if you're only following one person, obviously follow first and foremost the Lord above, but Donald Trump. And if you did not just watch his speech about the executive order many of us have been saying was coming regarding this election, he just told everybody what everybody needed to know within that whole conference. It was hilarious. He talked about Iran that will be gone in 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, it was, again, he's telling you guys without directly telling you, because he's still got to look somewhat neutral. But watch. You watch all these naysayer, so-called Trumpers, never Trumpers, all of a sudden Trumpers, or Trumpers that are turning against Trumpers or turning against Trump. Watch them spin this narrative. Now that he's done with his speech, watch him go for his jugular. This is so like awesome to see. It's I just hope you guys all can see what I'm seeing. I'm sitting back and watching these people expose themselves. So guys, please be careful, because they will still try to cause that divide, that division, all of that stuff. It will still be there, the fake news and all that stuff. But I like I said, follow Trump, guys. He's telling us everything we need to know. Also, too, everybody, we are being listened to in over 100 countries. If you come into the podcast late or you want to share it with a family or friend, we are making a lot of great noise, everybody. Positive noise. You can follow the podcast host on the podcast on the podcast host, which are iHeartRadio, Spotify, Anchor, Apple, Google, Breaker, POCKETCAST, PODBEAN, Riverside, Amazon Music. Social medias are Jenny Dreed Facebook, at Jenny_Dreed X, at JDreed Rumble, at JDreed True Social, at JDreed Instagram, the Revival of America right here on Telegram, and the Revival of America over on YouTube. Shoot, I was just gonna say something to you guys. I forgot. Anyway, I'm gonna go on with my PSAs and I'll let you know. Update on fields. Also check out the website, guys, therevivalofamerica.com. No, there is no cost. You do not have to sign up for the website. It's free. I don't charge for anything, guys. There's no fees for me. There's nothing there. Okay. I don't charge for anything. So go check that out. There's a field page over there for those of you that are asking about his books. Let me know. I can talk to you about those. John Baxter has a page. Rick Anson has a page. We're going to be creating one for Jason with 3D response systems, the school security system that's helping protect our kids while they're at school. It's an amazing system, guys. So if you know anybody want to get in front of legislation or anything like that, I know he's got a bill in front of the Senate, a couple bills actually, to get this thing passed through that he can start putting these things in schools nationwide. So it's absolutely amazing what he's doing with this security system. Also, too, guys, if you get a random message saying somebody, it's me, from me, or any of my guests, know that we will not reach out randomly and ask you if you're ready for the scare event, financials, anything like that. Please block, report them. Let me know so I can make sure they're not here on my channel or any of my other comment boxes, whatever it may be, because I'm getting messages coming through on my Rumble regarding John. They're pretending to be John. They're giving you an email, having you email them, and they'll further give you information on the frequencies and stuff that John talks about all the time, as well as the facility. It's a scam. I got a random email this morning, which, you know, I shared it with John, but I don't need to share it here. But it's another scam, guys. So please be careful. There are people out there saying, you know, charging fees just to sign up to even get out in a med bed or something like that, like $300 fee. You got to be careful, guys, because once you send them your information, they're going to give you all kinds of BS, collect your money, and then boom, it's done. These scams are getting more creative by the day, so be careful. Also, there's something else that's being surfaced out there I want to clear up regarding Silk. Silk is absolutely 100% with us. There's something that's being circulating on Facebook and some of these other social media platforms saying that she is no longer with us. That is bullshit, excuse my language, but it's a lie. So it's just more stuff you need to pay attention to. I've had that sent to me several times. She is alive and doing absolutely amazing. She will be on the show next Wednesday. They have sent that on up to their security to have them further look into it. So, but she is still with us, everybody. So don't believe that narrative if you see that floating around. Field McConnell, he's on the mend. He's still in the hospital. They're going to they're starting therapy, but it's been kind of a tough surgery. Obviously, had 7 ribs broken. They had to somehow get those, get them back together so they could grow properly, heal, mend back together. I don't know the logistics of it all, but he's on the mend. I did talk to him today, and I talked to his daughter and his home nurse. But he's on the mend. He is in pain, and I will just keep you guys posted on it. He wanted me to tell you all, and his home nurse. Thank you all for the love and the prayers. They are well accepted, and continue them, because this will be a bit of a journey for him and his healing. So just keep praying for successful healing for Fields. But I did talk to him today, and he sounded good. So, and of course he said, "Are you calling about the Monday show?" And I'm like, "No, no, 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 no." I said, "That's on hold. You take care of yourself first. You're most important." So he was thinking that I was trying to schedule him for the show. I'm like, "Oh no, I put that on hold for a while." So I thought that was kind of cute. He still has a sense of humor, but he's on the mend. He's doing well, obviously in pain, but he's on the mend, everybody, for those of you that are asking, and I do appreciate that. Also, too, everybody, if you want to email me a question or you want to get in touch with John and his staff over there, I'm centralizing all my emails to therevivalofamerica@yahoo.com, because I'm just so busy, guys. I'm a one-man show right now, and I just have to keep everything centralized so I can try to get back to you guys in a timely fashion. I get a lot of DMs, and on all my social medias everywhere I am. And it's just easier. Just do it to therevivalofamerica@yahoo.com. Now, if you have a journey or a story to tell, please send those to troasubmissions@yahoo.com. And I will vet those stories, because unfortunately we have the shysters over there as well trying to give us fake stories and just try to get on a show. And I don't do that. I don't do fake guys. I don't do any of that. So I will vet them, and if I believe it's a real legit thing, I'll reach out to you via email. Be patient, because I am trying to get to you all as quickly as I can. But again, I have a day job. I just got to keep reminding you guys. I haven't forgotten about you. I do read them, but my day job is priority. So bear with me. And just because if you've sent me something I haven't gotten back to you, it's not because I don't believe it's real. It's just that crazy in a good way, busy for me. So I want to thank all of you guys, because without you guys, Revival America wouldn't be. So with that, everybody, we'll sit back. If you guys want to chit chat for a little bit, have questions about Field or anything right now, while we wait for SG and on, because we are a little bit early, because we had some juggling of the time right now. But yeah, please raise your hand. I will unmute your mic and you can ask me a question, or we can just sit back in the awkward silence, or I can play my theme song, whatever you guys want to do. But I see a lot of familiar faces in here. I want to say hello to everybody. Hope you all are doing well. And yeah, so go ahead. If you guys have a question, feel free. And Rumble, hello to Rumble over there. Put your questions in the comment box over there. I am going to put my website down there for those of you that want to get in touch with me via email. And I will also put down the submission email to where you guys can, if you have a story or a journey to tell, you guys can throw your submissions to me in an email over there. So go ahead, everybody over here on Telegram. If you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand until SG gets in here and we can chat. Go ahead, RD242. Your mic is unmuted. Go ahead. There you go. Go ahead. Your mic's unmuted. Push the blue button in the middle of the screen. RD242, you requested mic. Hello, Bueller. All right, Bueller, I'm gonna have to mute your mic again. You guys, if you request a mic, go ahead. You unmuted it. Go ahead. Do you have a voice? You gonna speak? Okay, I'm gonna mute you. Listen, Linda's guys, if you request a mic, please use your voice. I know sometimes people can't find the mute but or the unmute button or whatever. I get it, but you know, especially when my guests are on here, their time is valuable, as is mine. I don't have time to call on you 3 times. I mean, you clearly hit the raise your hand button for a reason. So when your becomes unmuted, use your voice. Okay, Colorado Mama, go ahead. Your mic's unmuted. Hello, hello.
Hey,
What's up? Go
I
ahead.
don't know. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I've been watching today, and the markets are indicating that there's big things afoot. The things I'm looking at for geopolitical and financial are all tied together. Would you agree?
Oh yeah,
And
100%.
and as we're taking a look at this, we're looking at um, oil has gone down slightly today. Silver and gold have gone up measurably today. In fact, gold is at 46.7160 and silver's at 75.10. Silver went up $5 today. That's
Wow.
very good for silver. And I'm watching because we're coming into the Nikkei market here. And Nikkei market went down 822 points yesterday. It's about to go live here in a couple minutes. So I watch all these things going on around the world. We know that tomorrow that XRP becomes a big boy in the world. And so, and the price of oil is at $102. President Trump addressed that, as you probably picked up in his last little spiel. One of really intelligent reporters asked him, he says, so are you going to do something about the price of gas? It's like,
So let me just say this about the gas. So once this what is it, Operation Fury is done over there in Iran, I believe that's what they're calling it over there, and Trump just said it in his speech that we should be out of there within 2 to 3 weeks. And Caroline Levitt came out and said our gas prices will go down significantly. So pay attention to that, everybody. Yes, and what you're saying with I did not know this. I've been at work all day today, but with silver going up, I think that's freaking phenomenal.
yeah, it's called Epic Fury, Jenny. Epic Fury.
Yeah, Operation Epic Fury. Yeah, so it's supposed to come down here pretty significantly. So that should be very just remember, everybody, this is a tight pinch right now in the short term, but it's better in the long term. Tight pinch now, but it's a long-term gain. So remember that. I know people are having a hard time and bitching and complaining, but at the end of the day, there's always a method to our wonderful presidents. I don't even want to say madness. I think it's greatness, but there's always a method to it, guys. He's 1,000 steps ahead of everybody. Thank you, Colorado Mama. Go ahead, Scott. How are you, Scott?
I'm doing well, Jenny. How are you?
I'm fantastic. No complaints.
Just to add a little bit to that, and something that's extremely significant and that has to be on the radar, but it may not be something that's discussed. And I absolutely applaud what the president did today and what he said today and how he answered the questions. But even more important than that is the midterm election. And when you look at the electorate, really from a timeline, the president only has till about July or August to get things in place before the election has just detrimental effects. That's on his radar. Let that be, don't even question that, because he realizes that a loss in the Senate, a loss in the House is just making him up for the last 2 years. So
Well, and I've been telling my audience, 2020 isn't over yet. Juan says it all the time. I'm going to be bringing him on my show next week. But there's been this executive order that has been gonna be signing, and he did it today, guys. And I've been telling everybody that's freaking about these elections, there's gonna be something, and there has to be something that he's gonna play his trump card, if you will, whatever you want to call it, right before, like Scott's saying, it has to be before. He's got to do something before that timeline. So what he did today with this executive order is huge, and it's what many of us have been saying is coming, and it came, and you guys should be excited. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah. So when you take a look at that, and I absolutely agree with you, 2020 is not over yet. And if you look at what is coming out right now, John Solomon just posted a report within the last 24 hours from information from a declassified document from Tulsi Gabbard about $200 million coming from Ukraine into the Biden 2024 election. If you think that's the only stuff that happened, you're mistaken. So all that information is going to come out. We know that fraud vitiates everything, and there was definitely fraud. And it's a matter of them putting the case together. So when you take a look at what's going to come out from the 2020 election, when you look at the prices are going to in fact go down, and Trump in his how he looks at things and how he sets things up, and we all know that he's 5 or 6 moves ahead of everybody. He knows the timeline. Don't think that he's going to be crossing his fingers and hope that all this stuff happens before November. It's going to happen long before that, because voters are fickle, and voters vote with their pocketbook. Everybody knows that. So he has to get this thing in shape, in going, and burning on all cylinders long before the November election. So just understand that he's telling you exactly what the game plan is, not the game plan from a military standpoint, a game plan for how he sees things going. Now is not the time to not trust the president and what he's doing. You may not like everything that he's doing. You may hear negative things from the press, but you've got to trust him, and he knows what he's doing. He is playing this thing out like a master chess player. He truly, truly is. And we will see gas prices come down, and I think we're going to see some more things come out in terms of how he's going to safeguard the elections in November. And it's going to be a fantastic thing. Just have a little patience.
Amen to that. And everybody, real quickly, thank you, Scott. Good to see you, my friend. Tomorrow, you guys, real quickly, because SG and SG just popped into the space here, guys. Super stoked about that. I always love when the SJG comes on. But tomorrow, we've got 3 shows, guys. We've got Rob Cunningham over on my X Space from the Cool Show. So if you're looking for financial XRP information, cruise on over. That's going to be at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and I believe that would be 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And then we're going to have Warren from PPN. He's going to be coming in and taking the spot of Dallas. Dallas was going to be on this week, but his daughter has a track meet, so he'll be on next week. But I always love to have Warren on, and he recently was in Vegas regarding something to do with the Fed and the Treasury, and I think Juan O'Sabin was actually even up there too regarding these mortgage bonds. So I'm going to have these guys come on and share their information they got from there. And then Captain Kyle, guys. Captain Kyle will be back on tomorrow at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, I believe. You guys, I'm sorry, these times. I'm gonna make one of my walls here in my podcast room have, you know how they have all those time zone times, because these time zones kill me, and then we just changed again. So right when I'm right on it, spot on, they change again. But with that being said, SG Anon, what's up? How are you, my friend?
Everything's good. Thank you for having me back. Good to be here.
Oh my goodness, I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so sorry for this time juggle, whatever. But man, I'm glad you and I can get our schedules connected, and yeah, I just love it when you're here. Thank you for being here.
Well, it's great to be back, Jenny. I have to say, I always love hanging out with you and your audience. I think they have some really poignant and pertinent questions. And I popped in at the end of what a gentleman who goes by the handle of Fort Worth Patriot was talking about a minute ago. Just have a little faith. That really probably should be the framing for the entire discussion tonight. Everything that's happening in the world right now is discombobulated on purpose, but it's serving a very intentional and in some ways very subtle goal that's going to transform how the world views finance, how the world views the flow of, say, like energy markets, for example. It's really a very exciting time, but we do have to step back and remember that, we elected President Trump to get a job done, not just to be sort of a flagship, nice stand-up kind of guy. I think that we get a lot of that from him, but at the same time, the job that is being done requires a strong fist, and it requires a strong resolve.
So I agree with you 100%. Were you able to just see what just happened with Donald Trump and this executive order regarding the elections? 2020 is not over yet. Here it is. Did you see it?
I have not. If it was released over the last few hours, I've been tied down at the house with kiddo-related duties and other personal world things that I've not been able to tune into the feeds today really all that much. But we've known that an executive order was coming with respect to securing the midterms, because the Congress has demonstrated pretty unequivocally at this point that they are just simply not going to secure the elections. And the reason that they're not going to do that is because they benefit from the fraudulent system. They benefit from the pet projects. They benefit from the foundations that all of them have, both Democrat and Republican. And those foundations, of course, benefit from cheap labor. And oftentimes that labor is illegal. So looking at what's happening right now, it's not surprising to me that we've had an executive order. I'm excited to go and read it after our discussion today. But ultimately, we're going to build into a period where some pretty significant presidential power is going to be flexed over securing the federal elections here in the United States, because it's a matter of national security.
Yeah, he just did a whole press conference, and it wasn't too long. They were going over the executive order. Basically, it was going to destroy the fraud with the mail-in voting. And then he spoke about briefly how he was going to go sit in the hearing tomorrow of the birthright citizenship, which I thought that was pretty interesting. And then he let the press know, and the audience obviously watching, that we will be out of Iran within 2 to 3 weeks. So. And then Caroline Leavitt had put out there that as soon as Operation Epic Fury is done, say within this 2 to 3 weeks that we're out of there, the gas prices will go down significantly. Significantly. So, I mean, it was a great press conference for sure. What we've been waiting for, right?
Well, I find it very interesting that the presser covered that constellation of things, because when we look at securing the elections, we're talking about securing the ability of the American people to have the lawful representation that they choose come into power and then hold those reins of power unimpeded. The birthright citizenship sort of plays into the exact same discussion, right? You can have lawful representation all day long, but if you have a constituency that is not lawful, or if you have a constituency that is, utilizing a significant component to sway whatever those elections are, then that sort of defeats the entire purpose. So you can see how the cylinder is being capped at both ends with respect to that particular discussion. The Iran war, in my opinion, deals also with the elections, along with a number of other things. We could spend an entire podcast just unpacking the web that comes out of what's going on right now in the Persian Gulf and in the Middle East and in that broader regional arena. But one of the things that's happening here is the IRGC's cyber hacking capabilities are being absolutely obliterated. And we shouldn't delude ourselves. The Iranians are a very interesting and forceful culture, but they're not stupid by any means. And the IRGC has had one of the most advanced hacking divisions as far as like an intelligence community goes. They've had one of the most advanced and capable ones anywhere in the world for a very long time. They've infiltrated the U.S. Federal Reserve System just in the last 15 months. They hacked the 2020 election not once, but 4 separate times. They were sanctioned by the Treasury under EO 13848 as a result of a couple of those attempts. We know that there's been a lot of hacking to include personal databases tying back to personnel with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, including the director himself, Kash Patel. So looking at what's happening here, you have a multi-pronged assault occurring. It's not only producing fluctuation in the availability and transmission and transaction of resources. It's not only, obliterating the hidden intelligentsia communities that exist around the Middle East, in and around the Middle East. It's not only disempowering the Israeli secret and illegal nuclear weapons program that everyone knows is not so secret, but it's also obliterating the ability of those particular cellular nodes all across that area of the world to export their malfeasance around the planet digitally. And so when we look at that, it does not surprise me at all that we had this sort of as you described, sort of this three main topics that came through this press conference, they all strike me as very interconnected. The gas prices are obviously something that everyone has their attention on, but really the ultimate goal here, the ultimate objective, I think, is far and away from just reshaping the oil markets or drawing worldwide attention to the Strait of Hormuz or dealing with Iranian nuclear weapons. I think the ultimate goal here is obliterating the shadow state intelligence community that's had control of that area of the world for a very long time and has leveraged that control to affect elections in far more than the United States, and really to chokehold different nations from a resource basis, depending on whether or not they would cooperate with whatever that deep state complex was asking.
Wow. Yeah. That, like you say, there's a lot going on. I apologize, guys, in the background if you hear a jet. I have a jet flying over me right now, so I don't know if you guys can hear it or not. So everybody, what we're gonna do, because I know SG, he is here once a month, and I know many of you like to ask your questions to him. So if you guys have a question for SG, whether it be here on Rumble or here on Telegram, please feel free. Telegram, start raising your hands. I will unmute your mic, and you can ask SG your question. Or if you have a question over here on Telegram, type it underneath his video over there. I'll read it to SG. And then also to Rumble, write your questions in the comment box. So I have Airbrush Magician. Your mic is unmuted. Go ahead. Go ahead, Airbrush Magician. Magician.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I didn't have any questions. I was just trying to get into the room, man. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Good to have you here.
Yeah, good to have you here.
Awesome. Great show.
Can you talk a little bit, SG, about Iran and obviously what we're seeing over there, and with Trump saying that we could be out of there within two to 3 weeks?
Well, I'd be happy to. When we look at what's going on in Iran right now, what are the 3 or 4, I guess it's 4 main takeaways that we can see occurring? We can see, obviously, the obliteration of the Iranians' military capabilities from a standpoint of controlling the open seas, which affects shipping routes, that affects the transmission of logistical components, resources of all kinds, not just oil. It also completely disempowers the ability for that particular naval asset or naval arsenal, to facilitate illicit activities like human trafficking, which there's a fair amount of that comes out of the Persian Gulf, believe it or not. When we look at another takeaway is what's happening between Iran and Israel. And, it's very interesting. I want to dwell on this point just for a moment, because this is a big sticking point that a lot of what I guess we would call the black pill patriots or the sort of the panicking crowd has been really hung up about. Oh my gosh, Trump is, he's fighting Israel's war, and we're getting into another, hot situation in the Middle East, and it's all at the behest of Tel Aviv. But if you look at the actual sequence of events on the ground, I don't think that that's true at all. I think what you have is President Trump actually waging an unconventional war against Israel and utilizing Iran as the proxy state to do so. When you look at the devastation that has been doled out at Dimona, which is the site of Israel's, like I said, not so secret illegal nuclear research facility, it's their largest nuclear site that they have in country. And it is absolutely obliterated at this point. It's almost gone. When you look at the hidden bunkers that have been struck beneath very large population zones like Tel Aviv, and I feel empathetic and sad for anyone that is caught in the fray of that. But it's no different than the tactic that the Israelis have accused Hamas and everyone else of utilizing, which is, they hide in schools, they hide in residential neighborhoods, they hide underneath hospitals. It's the same thing being employed by the Israeli security forces and their shadow state complex that's being targeted by Iran. And so that complex exists right underneath some of those population centers as well, but it's being completely decimated. When you look at the demand on the Israeli munitions and the secret stockpiles that they have stored back of various U.S. weapons that they've purchased over the last 3 to 4 decades, they're being obliterated very rapidly, either obliterated or consumed. Either way, the net result is they're no longer there. They're either being used up or destroyed and made unusable. And that's happening quite a great deal based on the the Iranian strikes that we've seen on Israel just in the last 10 to 14 days. We recently saw the president put out a post discussing how France had restricted the U.S. military from utilizing their territory to lily pad over to Israel to give them more military supplies. We've seen Italy now prevent the U.S. military from utilizing bases in Sicily and in the Italian-controlled portion of the Mediterranean for doing the exact same thing. So what that's doing is it's creating a chokehold, almost like drying up the trickle, if you will, or drying up the stream of military assistance that goes into Israel at a time where they desperately need it. When you look at President Trump's putting out that he was going to blow up Iranian power plants, and then it was only a few hours later that the Iranians came out and basically said, well, okay, if you do that, then we'll do the exact same thing to U.S. bases and allies in the region and things of that nature, tet for tet, sort of tit for tat kind of a approach. But when President Trump said that, we have to keep in mind what actually comes as a result of that statement. The Iranians have a very decentralized power grid. They have substations all over the country, many of them underground and hidden underneath the mountains in the southwest. A lot of them hydropower in the very northern components along, I think it's the Caspian Sea that borders them. My geography is not super perfect at the moment. But with respect to that, the largest power plant that Iran has, which was referenced by, which was identified specifically by President Trump in that Truth Social post that I'm referencing, that power plant only supplies 3.5% of the entirety of power to the civilian infrastructure inside of Tehran, or excuse me, inside of Iran as a whole, inside of the whole country. So even if the United States military blew that power plant and say 1 or 2 more power plants up, you would be affecting 5 to 8, maybe 5 to 10% of the entirety of the grid inside of Iran. But by conversion or conversely from that, excuse me, I apologize. I've got some issues I've been dealing with in this area. They've been chemtrailing really hard, so bear with me on that. But with respect to the other side of that, the inverse of that, Israel's largest power plant supplies 24% of the nation's power, and it comes from one site, one industrial site. So a couple of Iranian ballistic missiles getting through the Iron Dome and hitting that plant would knock 25% almost, or a quarter, of the entire country out of power. So, it's what's happening here on the ground inside the Middle East, and this doesn't even begin to get into all of the different Mossad cells, Turkish intelligence cells, CIA associated or adjacent research stations and safe houses and forward operating bases that have been hit. All of that's occurring too, and the intelligence community is just taking a beating with respect to that broader Middle East crescent. But by and large, what we have happening, in my opinion, from the vantage point of an American watching this stuff go down, is Iran is doing the job that President Kennedy tried to do 60 years ago. President Kennedy tried to get the Israeli state to disarm itself and denuclearize, because President Kennedy knew that the increased militarization and weaponization of the nuclear components that they were researching, plus the conventional weapons that they had been aggregating in Israel since it was formed in 1948. He knew that ultimately that was going to destabilize the region. The Arab states would never put up with that long term. The Soviet Union had a very vested interest in several of those Arab states, still has a vested interest in some of them to this day, even though it's gone from the USSR to Russia. And ultimately, President Kennedy was afraid that we were going to end up in a hot shooting match with the Soviet Union using proxy states on the ground in the Middle East, not unlike what would have occurred with Russia 2002 to 2005 timeframe if the Russians had not been willing to just sort of let well alone with what we were doing in Afghanistan and Iraq. So President Kennedy was attempting to go about this in a diplomatic and sort of peaceable pressure style fashion. And obviously we know what occurred to President Kennedy. Nowadays, we have the exact same scenario, the exact same end goal playing out. But what's happening? No one asked the Israeli state to disarm itself. No one has asked or pressured Israel, utilizing the might of the United States dollar, the United States economy, the United States military, pressuring them to sort of move in a particular direction. We are simply allowing their largest regional competitor to go to step into the ring and begin pounding on them. And the same is true in the reverse. So you literally have the deep state eating the deep state, and it's all been coordinated and set up by the conditions that were laid out by the U.S. military, sort of forcing this issue into the table, flicking the dominoes and seeing what occurs coming downstream. So those are just a couple of the examples of what's happening there inside the Middle East. This doesn't even get into the worldwide energy market transformation that we're bearing witness to right now. We are watching the Rockefeller oil complex go away we are witnessing the deconstruction of a centralized oil and energy construct all around the planet that has a major base of operations there in the Middle East, either being completely eliminated and destroyed or being economically pressured out of existence. And so what that causes, outside of the high gas prices that we're all paying at the pumps, and I'm in there with everyone else, we're about $3.50 above where our normal our sort of average gas price has hovered for the last 7 to 10 years. But as we look at what's happening there, it's not just about those prices at the pump. It's about forcing different areas of the world to rely more regionally, in other words, more geographically proximal to where they have traditionally found these reliances to be, rather than on this global centralized complex that feeds really the central banking system and the central banking mafia. Russia and their ability to export liquefied natural gas and oil derivative products has gone through the roof with the higher prices that are being fetched on the open marketplace. Countries like China, most of Southeast Asia, India, a number of African countries are having to reallocate internal operations with resources that they already have and begin looking for different outlets to acquire a lot of those resources. It would not surprise me if you see the relationship between China and Japan begin to warm up as a result of the things that are happening here, because those Far East Asian powers are going to have to rely more on one another rather than the shipping lanes that run across the Eurasian steppes and down through the Indian Ocean and across, up the east side of the Pacific Rim, or excuse me, the west side of the Pacific Rim, I guess is how that's correctly stated. Europe is learning the exact same lesson through their own economic and energy crisis that they've created themselves, but that they've allowed themselves to create. It's not just about a deep state stealing elections. It's also about a public population that's been really apathetic about that. And we've seen that sort of laid out for the world ever since the first Trump presidency. So now we're seeing this massive constraint on the ability of European nations to provide for their own, to provide for their citizenry. And that may ultimately result in a warming of relations between Europe and Russia. And Europe and Russia have always been historically pretty decent trading partners, with a few, different axes that needed to be ground along the way and some different chiding and competition, of course. But by and large, for hundreds of years, they were really decent trading partners with one another and supplied a lot of what the other one needed. And we haven't even talked about the reversion to coal and things like that, and the divesting that's happening away from oil and into new energy and other forms of old sustainable energy. So what's the point of all that? The point of all that is the intelligence community is losing lock, stock, and barrel on every single dimension that they can. They're losing financially, they're losing economically, they're losing militarily, they're losing from a jurisdictional exceptionalism point of view, they're losing their hidden technology research sites, they're losing their forward operating bases that have been operating, most of them off book or adjacent to other sites that were undeclared, or other projects that were undeclared. Where do we think the Pentagon's failed audits are all going to? They're all going to things like this. So, and at the end of the day, you're also witnessing, again, this transformation of how nation states do business with one another, which is the biggest loss that can be sort of quantified here with respect to the central bankers' control of the entirety of planet Earth. This is actually a very, very exciting time to be alive. But if you're watching mainstream media of any flavor, even Fox News, and if you're watching most alternative media, they're not really doing the deep dive here to understand all these different layers. And that is so, so important. If you don't do that, you're not going to know what's actually happening here. You're going to see, part of the horse, but not the full thing. And you're going to wonder, where's the cart?
Amen to that. Isn't that the truth? And to your point and everything you were just saying, Trump did come out in this presser that he did, or whatever you want to call him, it was in the Oval Office, but he did say that there were no leaders over there and there was no army, because another what do you call him, journalist asked a question. Sorry, I'm getting a little distracted over here with my emails, but yeah, he came out and let them know. He's like, well, what are they threatening with? Because there's no army and there's no leaders over there. So I thought that was pretty telling. That I mean, we know that because we know that's what's been happening over there, right? But my question too for you, and then we'll go on to hands, everybody. So feel free to start raising hands, and I will call on you. I would love your take on it. The 3,000 boots on the ground that they're talking about sending over there of our military. I've been asking different people that I know their thoughts on it. Many are saying, it's to help with the cleanup over there. But I would love, your opinion on that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, well, I guess my thoughts on that would be sort of along the same lines of the things that we were just talking about a moment ago. We have to keep in mind that just because we have a relatively small deployment, and it is relatively small, you're talking about 3,000, maybe 4,000 troops in total that would be involved in that area.
Yep.
That is not a ground invasion force. That's not even an expeditionary force. What you have there is a crisis response situation that is likely to set up a foothold or maybe intervene on some shipping problems, or perhaps they'll take Carg Island and then go ahead and set themselves up for whatever reason that they need to be there. I would have to research it more before I speculate. But with respect to the doom and gloom talk about, oh, we're going to have another Iraq 2003, that's just patently ridiculous to say. If we were looking at a ground invasion anywhere in the Middle East, whether it's Kuwait, whether it's Turkey, whether it's the far western border of Syria, whether it's Iran, or even moving into Pakistan from the Gulf of Oman, you would need a force between 100 and 200,000. There's not anything near that happening right now in that area of the world, and we don't have indications that we're going to have anything like that either. People have tossed around this number about 40,000 troops or 50,000 troops in the Middle East. Over 40,000 of them have been there for a very long time. Excuse me, over 30,000 of them have been there for a very long time. A lot of them are likely to leave when this entire situation is over, because I imagine you'll have some host nations that don't exactly view the idea of U.S. military bases just operating with complete impunity inside of their nation states. They may not view that so friendly anymore after this conflict. But the idea that we're going to set up a ground invasion with a Marine Expeditionary Force and a couple of amphibious ships and maybe a carrier or two is just absurd. We're going in there, from the best we can tell, to handle any particular spin-offs that could occur. In other words, we don't want loose ends to fly off of the fire hose as we're attempting to turn the pressure down. And so I think that's what you have in the form of this MU deployment that's coming along that we've been told about. And we were told fairly early on, excuse me, sort of indirectly by President Trump, that Carg Island in particular was going to be a particularly sticky wicket. In other words, that particular island has a very large host of the Iranian oil capability and exportation capability. But in sort of running along parallel and alongside that, you have some research stations there on Carg Island, which are not super well publicly known, but you can find them online if you're willing to do a little bit of digging about it. And it looks like some of them have been dealing with this concept of enriched uranium. And we know the same is true in the very far southwest and in the very far south of the country. And so we may see a very small insertion to go in there and retain or grab some of those problematic materials, because we don't want some sort of radioactive crisis. But I would caution anyone who's looking at this and thinking to themselves, well, one stone leads to another, and then we end up pushing the whole avalanche downhill. That is only when we have malign forces that have been operating the bureaucracy of the Pentagon and the bureaucracy of Washington, D.C., which is our entire historical record over the last 50 to 75 years for these particular kinds of issues, these specific circumstances and scenarios. We do not have that now. We have a fairly clean, smooth process that we're able to see. We have a defined objective and defined parameters that we're willing to put up with and not put up with. We've seen the U.S. Navy keep itself actually pretty much at a distance with a lot of this, despite the fact that they're more than capable to go in there and cause havoc. And if they really needed to get out the big ball bat and march into the room, they certainly could. But that distance keeping, in my opinion, has been with the American soldiers and the American personnel in the region in mind. In other words, we can accomplish a lot of this without having to stick our foot in the pool. And we're only going to stick our foot in the pool insofar as we have to, in order to ensure that some of these problems cannot resurge. So looking at what's happening there with this talk of deployments and things like that, I would caution everyone to just step back for a moment. Are we actually going to see a military buildup capable of invading the country of Iran, which is almost twice the size of Iraq, not quite, but almost twice the size of Iraq? I don't think so. I think what we have going on, again, is this setup to control any particular spinoffs, any particular, wild hairs that may come out of this sequence of events as it progresses further. And President Trump just put out a statement, it was either yesterday or today, talking about how they were working in the background through back channels with individuals inside of Iran that seemed much more reasonable than the ones who were there prior. So we may not have the type of military danger or the type of adversarial warfare style danger applying to the troops that are going to that area as we did in 2003, 2004, and I think it was all the way up to like 2008, 9, and 10. The circumstances are completely different. The bureaucracy is totally neutered in this particular day and time, and the parameters have been squarely and objectively set. Now it's just a matter of, can we accomplish these objectives without having to hit that slippery slope?
Thank you, SG. All right, everybody, we're going to go to some questions. So, Miss Grace, go ahead. Your mic is unmuted.
Yes, hi Jenny, and hi SG.
Hello.
Thank you again for all you do, and thank you SG. Y'all are both two of my favorites. I don't get to hop on as much, Jenny, as I like, but real quick, SG, I keep hearing from people I trust, and I know you trust them because you're on their shows. People like Captain Kyle, I know Jenny respects him as well. A few others in the same line. You know, there's talk of eventually there'll be a shift, and that we will, reach an ascension level that's different than the one we're on. And we're kind of making that shift slowly now. And I know a lot of us feel that. We feel tired. We feel this, different feelings for different people. But I want your thoughts on that. I've never really heard you talk about that. And I didn't know if you had an opinion or if you're just sitting back and watching that part. I do believe there's a big spiritual aspect to what we're going through. I know Jenny agrees with that, and I'm sure everybody listening does. But I wanted your opinion on what you think that shift will be like, and do you have any insights to share with the audience on that? Thank you so much, and God bless you both.
What a fascinating question. It's very
That was awesome, Grace. Thank you.
it was, and totally
Thank you.
unexpected. Looking at, and you're right, I've not publicly given my opinion on it really because I've just never been asked. But with respect to this, and what you're talking about, I think, is the spiritual component, right? The idea that our consciousness is changing, that we as human beings are becoming more aware of a lot of different things. We're becoming more aware of our spiritual power. We're becoming more aware of how reality around us is sort of formed and molded in alignment with the Holy Spirit of the living God. We're becoming more aware of our own anatomical capabilities that have been suppressed for a very long time. Why did they put fluoride in the public water for the last 75 years? Well, obviously there had to be a reason for it. And if you go research the pineal gland inside of the human cranium, you understand very quickly probably what was one of the motivating components for that. So, the question, I think, the essence of it is, the earth is changing. We are changing. We know that it's occurring, but what is it? What's actually happening? And where does this go? Where does it all lead? Truth be told, that's probably the answer to it ultimately, is probably above my pay grade. But I keep coming back to that verse in 2 Timothy. We don't have, or maybe it's 1 Timothy, we don't have a spirit of fear. We have a spirit of power, love, and a sound mind. Well, it's not just this esoteric component of the human being that we connect with late at night when we're on our bedside or when we're in our prayer closet. Our spirit is a body of its own. We have an energetic field that exists in and all around us. Our nervous system literally runs on it. If you look at any human body that is photographed under something called Kirlian photography, that's Kirlian for folks out there that want to research it, you will actually see the electrical offshoots. Aura is really kind of a misnomer for it, but it's sort of this impression field that comes off of the human body, and the human body's solid matter appears as almost like a silhouette under this particular photography. But you can see these beautiful movements of what seem like, electricity almost flowing through water, and that is the field that your own spiritual body, your own energetic body generates. And so that field is changing with respect to what's happening with the earth, but it also changes with respect to our connection or not, our allowance or not. A good way to say it is our alignment with or our not alignment with the Holy Spirit of God. When that alignment happens and we have those moments where we say that God was speaking to us and we just knew it, and there's no doubt in our mind that it was coming from, the Almighty, and that it was clear, and that it was, crystal appeal. What's the word I'm looking for? Palpable is the word I'm looking for. When we have those moments, we know that we came into alignment with that Holy Spirit. I had a moment just like that not very long ago, where I was laying on my living room floor and I had laid down to stretch my back out. Sometimes it gets a little sore and tight, and I was having kind of a morning. Actually, it was sort of a mopey morning on my end, to tell you the truth. And I had just decided that I was going to lay there and I was going to stare at the ceiling fan that was above me, in my family room area, and I was just going to try and keep my mind quiet. And I said a short prayer, God, if there's something you want me to know, I'd sure love for you to point me in the right direction, because I can't mentally figure my way out of my own quagmire this morning, and I'd like not to have a crappy day. And that was basically the prayer that I said. Well, I was there for probably 3, 4, 5 minutes, just sort of drifting from thought to thought, from this to that to the other. And then I sort of hit a point where I got almost focused in on what the ceiling fan was doing. And I guess maybe a good way to say it is I didn't have a lot of active thoughts, running through my head in that red hot minute. And I had this sort of like very warm sensation all the way from the soles of my feet up to my head that started to sort of, wash over me like I was flushed. And then it immediately turned cool, but it also felt very tingly. Like there was this, like I had plugged my foot into a power outlet is really the best way to explain it. And at the same time that was occurring, I had this really strong thought come into my head: go over to the window and open the blinds. Well, I went over to the window and I opened the blinds, and there was a whole family of woodland hares that were sitting not 3.5, maybe 4 feet from my windowsill, and they were just munching away on clover. I'm just having an absolute time with one another. There were 4 or 5 young ones, really little ones that you could tell, and maybe 3 adults. And there was a pretty big one that I would assume was probably the group leader. I couldn't tell you if it was male or female, but it was a really big little rabbit. And as I was standing there at the blinds, I was there for a few seconds sort of watching this and infatuated with how just at peace they looked. They were having a great day, and they were having the kind of day I wanted to have. And then one of them looked up and perked their ears up and looked right at me. I guess they maybe saw my reflection or caught my reflection in the window that morning. And then all of the rest of them, almost in unison, right after that happened, they all peeked up and they stuck their ears up, and now they're all looking at me. And so for 3 or 4 seconds, here I am staring at this gaggle of rabbits, and they're staring back at me. And there's not anything happening in that moment, but it was so funny. And I laughed out loud. And one of them hopped over towards the window and came within about, I would say, 18 inches of the window, and sort of tilted its head. And I was looking down at it, and it didn't do anything. And then it, put its feet down and walked away, and they sort of went on and about their business. And I realized in that moment that I had just gotten a visit from God, that was an indication that all really was well, that I was making too much of this, that things are not as serious as we sometimes get ourselves all whipped up about, and that there is a connection, sort of this binding force that exists where creation is part of us and we are part of it. And so I know I'm sort of waxing along with this story, but it's to drive home the point, the essence of the question here, because I can't really answer the foundational basis, which is, where does this go? I really don't know. All I do know is that along the way, we are becoming aware that God is real, that God is not far away, that we don't have to come before God at a particular time of day or on a particular day of the week, that there's not a separation that exists between us and him, insofar as, let me rephrase that. There's not a separation that exists outside of our own fallen nature, right? And sometimes we have to come out of that fallen nature modality of thinking, that operating, if you will, to get to that area that Christ told us about. No one comes to the Father but by me. I don't think it was just literal. I think part of it was literal, but another part of that, I think, was by my example. No one comes to the Father until they place the Father first, and until they realize that they can be one with the Father. And that's a choice that has to be made. That's an awareness that has to happen. And so when we look at that and what's happening in the world, nature is sort of teaching us that all along as we go. And the Earth seems to be doing that as well. When we look at the Schumann frequency, for example, I don't understand, geothermal physics and planetary level photonics by any means, but I know what a rising frequency means. And I know anything upon that Earth that is tied into that Earth electrically, like us electrical beings are, we're going to be affected by the change in that frequency. And a higher frequency is always a higher power. And a higher power yields all sorts of things: a different awareness, a new lens, a new appreciation. I felt that day after I concluded my little powwow with the rabbits, I felt like I could take on the world. At the same time, I didn't feel the need to go out and wrestle the world down to the ground and kill it. I just felt that I was, not invincible, but very, very safe, right? Like that Psalm 91, under the wing of the Almighty kind of thing. I forget the exact wording from it, but it's very much sort of along those lines. And I think as we come to realize that as humanity, who we really are, and then take that forward into the future, it's going to affect our day-to-day attitude. It's going to affect how we see each other. It's going to affect how we see ourselves. It's going to affect how we perform at work, or whether or not we keep a certain job or move to a different job. It's going to affect how we respect this concept of our dynamic with the Holy Spirit or not. Are we in alignment? Are we in agreement? Or are we out of agreement, right? And we can feel when we're out of agreement because we're mad about it. It frustrates us. You can feel when you're looking at something or you're looking at someone and you know that God has a different opinion about that particular thing as opposed to the opinion that you might have, and it just feels rough. It feels nasty sometimes. And so I think all of this combines to answer the question of, what does ascension mean? Ascension doesn't mean that we're running up some ladder or that we're all going to be gurus that are magically using telepathy or telekinesis at some point. Maybe that'll come. That's beyond my understanding. I don't know. But what I do know is our awareness that God is real and that we are creations that are symbiotic with him, and that we move about in this world day to day, minute by minute, hour by hour, with the option to be focused on him or not be focused on him, and then to allow that power to work through us or not work through us. I think that's the transformative part of what ascension really means.
Wow, that was
Thank-
amazing, SG. Thank you. I'm sorry, Jenny. That was amazing. Thank you so much. I agree with everything you said. Really fast. I live in the upper northern mountains of Georgia and the eastern mountains of Tennessee. So we have two homes, and I travel back and forth. And because of our boys, their private academy. And I've noticed, like, we never have everything blooming this time of year, ever. Like, I promise you. And everything is in full bloom. So the earth, I feel, is even ascending, is growing, is blooming earlier. And I hope that's because they're cleaning up our soil and they're cleaning up our air. But beyond that, I really feel like the earth is ascending along with us spiritually. So just thank you again. That was beautiful. I really appreciate you entertaining that question and thought I was having. I just wanted your opinion. I've heard others and I wanted yours. Thank you, and God bless you so much.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you, SG. That was great, by the way. Go ahead, Kira. Your mic is unmuted. Kira Vance, go ahead.
Hey, I was just curious on the July 4th. What is your opinion of what we might see, or how is our how is our 4th of July going to be? Just curious, just wanting a little intake.
Well, it would be my speculation, Miss Kira, I gotta say, but when we look at all of the pacing and all of the progression of these different irons that President Trump has in the fire, from the economic component to the Supreme Court to certain opinions that the court has yet to render, which I think our next major opinion time is going to be in June, if I'm not mistaken, to Russiagate, to all of these different things. I think it is very, very possible that our 4th of July perhaps starts to kick off this idea of the arrests that we've all been talking about, right? We know that all roads lead to Russiagate. And that's
Yes.
not just all roads from the election component, although that seems pretty obvious, but it's all roads from even the COVID tyranny. Why did COVID occur? Outside of the Luciferian occultist symbolism for why they wanted COVID to occur, we can see pragmatically that COVID occurred to help steal the 2020 election in the United States and overthrow the government. So looking at where this begins and where it ends, I think we're in for a years-long period of justice where we're going to have a whole lot of winning, because you'll begin to see the web crumble fiber by fiber by fiber. But DNI Gabbard has been investigating this issue of the 2020 election and Russiagate as one singular issue, all lumped together under the same umbrella, since February of 2025, when Dominion voting machines were seized from Puerto Rico and they were seized without any notoriety, no press releases from DNI, no notices from the FBI, no mainstream media reports. It was done very, very quietly. And we've seen a lot of those same types of activities over the last year. We've seen the FBI and the DNI office in Fulton County, Georgia. We've seen the FBI in Maricopa County just recently. I think we would be silly to think that whatever the FBI brings out of Maricopa would not also end up in the office of the DNI over these types of things. So it would not surprise me as we move past Memorial Day and into the July 4th season, sort of that June and early July season, if we start to see some pretty significant action on arresting those that plotted the conspiracy basically to run a years-long coup and overthrow the president of the United States and destroy the will of the American people. And that's a pretty big tree, right? We know that Obama's at the top, and I think we all can sort of understand how serious it's going to get, because President Trump has reminded us that Obama will face a military commission. He will not just be held accountable in a civilian court of law. This will go to the military before it's all over. But the entire tree and all of the roots and branches underneath Obama, it's pretty vast and pretty wide. You've got the Gang of Eight, you've got Adam Schiff, you've got several Congress people that are not even in Congress anymore. We've recently seen legal action by Eric Swalwell to try and prevent the DOJ and the DNI office from releasing records pertaining to his Fang scandal, which I believe was very likely an intelligence swapping scandal that existed in the background, a lot of funneling back and forth there, potentially of sensitive classified information. So I think those arrests are likely to start late spring, early summer, moving towards that July 4th holiday. And July 4th could kick off a period of several months where we see this escalation go all the way through the tree as we start from the base and the trunk and work our way into the low limbs and then the high limbs, and then ultimately the top of the tree, which takes us to Brennan, to Clapper, to foreign nation interference, foreign nation acts of war committed against the United States, and all of it facilitated by a treasonous 44th president.
Okay. Okay. I appreciate your input. I've just been kind of wondering what we might kind of expect, or what we might see. And I was kind of hoping that it was that. So I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kira. And what a celebration that will be for all of us, is to see these arrests, or finally, we know a lot of stuff's happening behind the scenes, but for the public consumption, what I always say over there on X, because X is kind of in La La Land. Anyway,
Yeah.
but yeah, to see for them to be able to finally see these arrests, because they all say nothing's happened, there's no arrest. But yeah, what a celebration that would be, everybody. I mean,
I just hope it wakes up the rest of the remaining few.
well, you know what? We're not going to wake up everybody, unfortunately. There may be that 4 to 6% that may never wake up, but we certainly can continue to do what we're doing, and hopefully they will. We'll see. Cross our fingers, right?
Amen. Well, God bless you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kira. All right, Mr. Crash, go ahead. Your mic is unmuted. Go ahead, Crash. Are you crashing? Hello, Crash. You requested a mic. Okay, while we wait for Crash, SG, here's one from Walter. I get the impression that in the future, the European countries will become less influential in the world. What is your opinion of how Europe will change?
I think that's a great question. I think that how Europe will change will be a fragmentation of this super state construct that they've been toying with, this sort of socialist utopic idea that's really just become a hellscape for them economically, and industrially as well, across all these different nations. I think you're going to see a resurgence of European pride, what it means to be French, what it means to be German, what it means to be Italian. You're really sort of already seeing that in France, in England, in Italy. Prime Minister Meloni's not a perfect prime minister, I don't think, by any means, but at the same time, she's very in tune with the idea of being Italian and the pride of that, and the pride of what the Italian culture has accomplished over the last several thousand years. Marine Le Pen and her party in France, sort of the exact same approach. Alice Weidel and Alternative for Deutschland, or Alternative for Germany, recently gained a lot of seats across the parliament. They're now a significant political force inside of Germany. And their message has always been, look, we need to preserve Germanic culture. We are German. We are not German plus. We are just German. So I think ultimately that's the goal here with Europe. And I think you're going to see that happen. The other thing I think you're going to see happen is each respective culture within the European shelf, from Hungary and Poland and Slovakia in the east, all the way over to France and England in the west, and even Ireland. I think they are all going to really invest heavily in the traditional. I say traditional, but that's almost like a misleading word. In the ancestral services and goods and offerings that they have always brought to the fore. England has always been a seafaring nation, and they're very, very good at it. Scotland and Ireland, same sort of thing. France has always had a heavy focus on technology and convenience and culture and the arts. The same is true of Italy, but also a big seafaring component to the Italian peninsula and Sicily, and how that all sort of blends together in their minds. Poland and the far eastern areas that border Ukraine and Belarus, they've always sort of had a balancing act to achieve between the Slavic cultures east of them and the more Germanic and post-Gaulish and post-Roman cultures that exist in the Central and in Western Europe. And they're very, very good at bridging that gap. And of course, they bring all sorts of resources to the table, access to the Baltic Sea, a lot of lumber, a lot of critical minerals come out of those areas, and a lot of trade routes that are very, very important, which they have historically relied on some tolls and some taxation to make a little bit of coinage from. And so I think all of this is going to play into these different cultures as they resurge. Several of them, again, we're already seeing that happen. And the Russians are aware of this, right? The President Putin has said a number of different times, his quarrel is not with Europe. His quarrel is with the satanic cult of the West that just happens to be in control of a lot of Europe, as well as, for a long time was in control of the United States of America and a great deal of the Mediterranean as well. And of course, Scandinavia being involved in that also. So the Russians, I think, are looking forward to the same sort of pride that they have managed to, integrally maintain over the last 100 years or so, resurfacing itself across what have been historically their friends, right? The Russians have been pretty good partners with the French, with the Italians, with the Czechoslovakians before it became two separate countries. They were very, friendly and cordial with the Polish group in that area of sort of like a northeastern Central European, arena, what was formerly the Prussians, but then it became Poland. So there's always been this, back and forth that has existed. And I'm expecting those scales to begin to realign more in alignment with what they have historically been. But I will quantify that by saying that the digital age adds a wild card, because the digital age did not exist before, right? If you were to get information traversing nation states, it almost always has gone either through print, through relayed oral message, and then for a period of time, late 19th century into the 20th century, it came across telegraph and telephone wire and radio. The digital age takes the lag time out of all of that. So we could very potentially see a distinct cultural resurgence across these nations inside of Europe, but this prevailing idea that we are all European, in the same fashion that we have Arizonans and Texans and Floridians and Michiganders and Washingtonians here in the United States, but we're all primarily Americans. I think the exact same approach is likely to happen in Europe. And ultimately, it's going to be, I think, a huge benefit for everyone. They will help ballast the Mediterranean and the North Sea and most of the Atlantic sphere of influence, I think, from a power, from a geopolitical, from a resource management, from a security standpoint, all of that factoring in. They'll be assisted by Russia, which is basically the main powerhouse for the Baltic region and the Arctic and the Black Sea, and that gets into far Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe into the Caucasus. And then the United States is likely to be sort of the big brother, if you will, of the Western Hemisphere, with all of us sort of characterizing ourselves as Americans in this hemisphere of the Americas.
Thank you, SG. Great response. This is a comment from Palm Mom. This is pretty interesting. I don't know if you've heard it or anybody here, SG, but it says, not a question, just a comment. I learned today, did you all know the show The Walking Dead was produced by Valhalla Productions? interesting, I thought. I think it was very interesting. Have you heard that, SG?
I have heard that. I've not
You
focused
have?
on it. I've not focused on it, but I have heard that. And that is very interesting considering some of the rhetoric that we've seen from different, what we
Yeah.
would characterize as key players over the last 6 to 9 months.
That's awesome. Thank you, Pom Mom, for sharing that. That's awesome. I've never heard that, but now you know. All right, go ahead, Trump Train. Your mic is unmuted. And again, everybody, if you have a question over here on Rumble, please write it in the comments. Or if you have a question here on Telegram, raise your hand. I will unmute your mic or write it in the comment box. Go ahead, Trump Train.
Good evening, Jenny, and good evening, SG.
Hello.
Hey, SG. With all the stuff that is being released now, we've already known that Venezuela was probably done back in 2022, and Congress keeps going with this. If we're going to war, or we're doing this, we need to be notified, yada, yada, yada. Just like the Iran deal. The Iran deal probably happened several years ago, but they're just making it known to us now. And that's what some people cannot really pick up on is, how did this happen a couple years ago and we're just now finding out about it? Well, that's probably because the fake news has always been lying in front of our face every night. Now, granted, they might spill some beans, a little bit of truth every now and again, but for the most part, they're not telling us what we need to know. So, I just want to know your heartfelt thought with what's going on in the world today, and that the gas price is up there, brother. And we've got a lot of people. Well, no, there's a lot of worldwide people that have invested heavily in a major country out there that we invaded for no reason at all. And you went in there and robbed all their resources back in that era. But I think all this will be a wash. What are your thoughts on Iraq, SG?
Iraq or Iran, Trump Train?
Iraq. I've been
Okay.
there. I was there from 2005 to 2007. So, yep.
Okay. Go ahead, SG.
Well, first of all, thank you for your service and thank you for that adventurism that you were on. I want to acknowledge that first and foremost. We just don't do that enough as a culture anymore. We really should. But with respect to everything that he was just saying, I didn't hear much of that I disagreed with at all. I think most of the overarching coordinations that had to occur for things like Venezuela, for things like Iran, for the situation, even going back to the situation that occurred in Syria in 2017, when we coordinated with the Russian military before blowing up the secret intelligence community nuclear site that was in the northeastern Syrian desert with 60 plus Tomahawk missiles. I think a lot of that coordination has occurred going as far back as 2016, 2017. And I think the Q entity was a major component of that. I think there was a lot of messaging that came from the Q entity that was meant for high echelons of command, either inside of allied nations from a military standpoint or inside of allied nations from a government actor standpoint, who would take those communiques and decrypt them and utilize them for whatever messages they were, meant for. Q said several times, not everything on these boards is meant for Anons. And so looking at that level of coordination that existed, looking at how easily we got Maduro, looking at how we have sort of starved NATO over these last several years, 5-6 years running at this point, depleting them of ammunition, depleting them of, or really taking a lot of their teeth out, so to speak, and taking the fight out of them. As we look at, the ongoing drag out with the Ukrainian situation and all of the money that went into that, there's a lot of that, I think, that was sort of agreed upon far ahead of time. But at the same time, to Trump Train's point, when you have a media apparatus that will absolutely never tell the truth, and Q told us MSM will never tell the truth, then you have to walk those things out in a progression of events that make sense for the broad public at large, who are not reading the irregular war. They're not abreast of anything unconventional coming from President Trump. They don't understand the phrase of Q plus. They don't have any basis for reference with any of that, no measuring stick. And so they have to sort of be, shown a picture that unfolds in a very particular way. Now, at the same time, you do have some wild hairs that come into the fore. I think that the Iran situation is a good example of that. It's one of the reasons we do have a Marine Expeditionary Force that's been activated for that, because we don't want any wild hairs to sort of derail the whole operation. But with respect to Iraq, the thing that's happening with Iran right now is affecting what's going on in Iraq, and Iraq is ultimately going to benefit dramatically from it. But one of the things that's happening is the Iranian proxies that have infested the Iraqi intelligence community ever since 2006, 2007, 2008 timeframe, because they were invited in by the Pentagon bureaucracy, unfortunately at the consternation of even our own foot soldiers on the ground. They are now being essentially squeezed to the point of bursting. They either have to leave the country or they have to reveal themselves and potentially wind up being intercepted either by a military force or by, more likely, what I think is more likely, the civilian policing actions that have been undertaken by the prime minister. And I can't remember his name. Al-Shadadi, I think, is his name. But he's someone who has been working very, very closely with the Trump administration through the Trump administration's ambassador. Now, all of this is against the background of just last year, the Iraqi central bank basically releasing what amounted to a central banker's white paper on how they were going to revalue the internal workings of their economy and then readmit that economy first regionally and then internationally for trade, for reliquidation of certain things. They secured and actually had issued finally last year an over $600 million loan that came from the International Monetary Fund, which was released into the Iraqi economy, but it's not been fully unleashed into the private sector there just yet. All of this stuff that's happening in the Middle East, I think, is gearing us up for exactly that moment. And you're going to see, just like we were talking about Europe a moment ago, you're going to see in all of these Arab states a reflection of how they want their culture ultimately to be. When we think about the militant factions of extremist ideologies, and Islam is certainly one of those, we have to keep in mind that those militant factions usually don't encompass more than 20%, maybe 25% of the overall backing, the overall faith lens, if you will, of any one of those groups. In other words, they are all interested in peace as well. And we've seen that from the conduct of the UAE, from the conduct of Saudi Arabia, the very close relationship between Crown Prince bin Salman and President Trump directly. The two of them personal friends. The Crown Prince hugged him the last time that they went over there. That is a huge gesture coming from an Islamic country and the basically what amounts to the Sultan of that country, or the runner-up for the Sultan in that country. That's a massive, massive gesture. That's like an Asian prime minister doing what she did at the White House, where she gave President Trump a bow at the waist and then hugged him right out of the limousine. So looking at this, I think you're going to see a resurgence of what these cultures really are all about. Iraq has traditionally been a pretty stable area of the Middle East. They are a very fertile and very resource-rich nation. They're one of the main food producers in the Arab world because of their, the geography of the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers that run down from eastern Turkey and then through the central, Iraqi land down to the Persian Gulf, I believe it is. They're also rich in gemstones. They have a tremendous amount of gold there in the caves that are underneath their deserts. Plus, they host a lot of antiquities of mankind, many of which were heisted by the U.S. military and intelligence services during the Iraqi invasion and subsequent occupation that occurred there. So I think you're going to see a lot of this resurge. But what's happening in the Middle East, I can't stress this enough, what's happening there now is paving the way. It's sort of like pre-paving the grid to bring these new realities to the fore, to bring this new resurgence and make it possible. You can't revalue, for example, the Iraqi economy and interject that much wealth into the Gulf region as a whole, and it would permeate very quickly out into the Gulf states until you remove the thumb from the scale, which has been placed on the scale from all these different nodes. Tehran is certainly one of the biggest nodes, but we had problems in Bahrain. We had problematic actors in Israel. We still have problematic actors inside of Cairo that are going to have to be dealt with before we can really run that gamut. But ultimately, I think you're going to see the whole Arab world really begin to blossom and show itself as the prosperous, sort of pseudo kingdoms that they've always been, but with a bent of self-representation in a fashion that their people have never had access to before. And that is made possible by this idea of, a resurgence of prosperity married with the digital age. It really is an incredible time to be alive. And I'm very, very excited for our veterans of the Iraq War here in the United States who are still with us and paying attention to these events, because I think they're going to receive a great deal of closure and a great deal of healing, knowing that even though we were there for auspices that none of them knew and that wasn't declared to them, good ended up winning out in the end.
Thank you, SG. Trump train. Did that answer your question, sweetie? And thank you again for your service, my friend.
Yes, Jenny, thank you.
Oh, God bless you, my friend. Hang in there. Big hugs. Big hugs. Oh. All right. One ammo. Go ahead. Your mic is unmuted. Go ahead, one ammo.
Thank you so much, Jenny. SG, I wanted to ask, this may be a silly question, and I haven't been on here for very long. So, what does Easter is our timeline mean, and who started that or who said that? Did that come from the administration or the Anons?
That is a great question. And I'll be honest with you, One Ammo, it's not one that I remember right off the top of my head. But if I recall, I thought President Trump coined that phrase during the pandemic of 2020, when COVID was really hitting the landscape hard economically, and people were pressing him, when are we going to do this?
You're correct, SG. You're correct.
Okay. Well, and it would make sense that would have been coined at that time, because when we look back, President Trump's fond of his chart, right? It's the chart. This is my favorite chart. I sleep with that chart. If we go and look at that chart, it's an immigration chart with all the bar graphs and stuff, but the arrow at the bottom says Trump leaves office. But that arrow wasn't pointing to January of 2021. It was pointing to April of 2020. So acknowledging then that continuity of government probably kicked in response to that event, Easter being our timeline, we also know that things run in cycles and that military operations tend to run along in what are called windows. So windows of opportunity, right? You have timelines for this, you have timelines for that. Weather plays into that, climate, topography, the style of operation, changes on the game board, et cetera. There's a lot of different things that go into it. But fundamentally, cycles tend to run themselves pretty common. You tend to, and a good example of this is like World War II. Tank campaigns were usually undertaken in the late summer, early fall, or in the dead of winter when you had nice, hard, solid permafrost, with the exception of some of the tank campaigns into Russia because it was just so cold that the fuel was freezing. Aerial campaigns tend to happen in the summertime, especially the late spring, early summer, because your weather is a lot better. Your cloud cover tends to be a lot more cooperative with that. And that would happen each year. If you go back and look at World War II history, all of the major air campaigns tended to occur between April and August. Now, some of them were outliers and happened in late fall, and a few of them happened during the winter months, especially the siege of Stalingrad. But looking at what occurred there from a warfare standpoint, it seemed to run pretty predictably. And when those windows were closed, then that window was closed for a period of time and it would reopen again next year or next season or next phase or however those campaigns were divided up. So when President Trump says something like, Easter is our timeline, or we're all going to have a great Christmas, we have to keep in mind that he may not be talking only about this next upcoming one. especially when a military campaign is in the background, we may also be referring to a cyclical timeline where Easter each year is going to be a pivotal phase point where we're going to try and accomplish something before that. And I find that very interesting that he stated Easter, because what happens at the end of March in every single year? The reconciliation of the international ledger for the Bank of International Settlements, i.e. the Bank of the Rothschild family, up until 2018. And so when we look at Easter being our timeline, in the United States of America, from the American perspective, those reconciliations would occur between 31 March and 1st of April. And then if you count a week, maybe 10 days for some of those reconciliations to work their way back into the market space inside of the United States, especially with the Federal Reserve and its ability to influence things like interest rates or purchasing power or treasury bonds, et cetera, it would take until about Easter each month, each year. Easter, April, that holiday in April, it would take about that long to see those transformations occur cyclically across the timeline. So I know that's sort of an all over the place answer, but I really do believe that President Trump gives us communications that are not only meant for the here and now, but can also be referred to when we look at how things tend to flow and how things tend to ebb. And the concept is not all that foreign to us, right? We have a growing season. We have a wet season. We have a dry season. We have a hibernation style season. These are things that have gone on since time immemorial. Ecclesiastes tells us that there's a season for everything, and there is a time for every purpose under the heavens. And so when we look at that being laid out here, I think that it's just a matter of applying that concept broad spectrum.
Thank you so much. That's easily understandable. Just hearing a lot of scuttlebutt that this Easter is special for some reason, and I don't know how to answer that when I'm asked, and also not to increase the hopium that something's going to happen by April 5th, and that kind of thing. I don't want to, but I like that things that happen at that time of year. I mean, it's spring and things start coming up and all that kind of thing. So I totally agree. I thank you for your answer.
Well, something I heard today in a chat is that typically Easter's come early this year. It's normally a little bit further into the month, like second week maybe. But it was said this morning in another chat that Good Friday lands on the same day is when Jesus when all of that happened with Jesus. And then, obviously the third day he rose again. And this hasn't happened, I guess, in so many years that this day we're having it this day, the same day that, it was Good Friday for Jesus. So I was going to do some more research, but I thought that was interesting because I did hear that this morning.
Yeah.
I haven't had a chance. So maybe that's what they're talking about. It's very
Yeah.
special in that regard. That
Exactly.
it's the same day because it's what are we at today? It'll be April 3rd, is that right? So
April
think
5th is Easter, I believe.
no, well, Good Friday. So it's
Oh, Good Friday.
all of
Yeah,
it.
April
Yeah,
3rd.
all of
Yeah,
this is happening on the same days that it happened back then. So I
right.
heard that this morning. I haven't dug further into it, but we're talking about it. So I thought I would just kind of throw that. You guys can do your own research too on it. So yeah, I definitely
And
want to put that
I
out there.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that because I'm thinking when we went to church, we always said Happy Resurrection Day, not Happy Easter.
Right.
And I'm thinking, okay, our timeline is Easter. Does that mean someone is going to be resurrected like JJ or, and so on and so forth, that they're going to come out from Gone with the Wind, I'm thinking along those lines, and wouldn't that be great? And I'm thinking also something's got to happen this year because July is not that far away, and we're going to be celebrating the Republic and all of that, and 250 years and all of that. So I'm thinking a lot might be happening in the next couple of months, and I'm hoping that Resurrection Day kicks it off.
Well, we're soon going to see. I know JFK Jr. is circulating a lot. His name, the love story. If you haven't watched that love story, guys, go watch it. There's a lot of information on there. But yeah, he's circulating a lot again. And but yeah, a lot to come, everybody. Real quickly, SG, how you doing on time, my friend?
I've got time for one more, but before I do that, I want to throw in one last comment about Easter this year. Easter comes on 4/5/45.
Ha 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 ha. There you go. I love it. Thank you, SG. Okay, Miss Jackie, go ahead. Your mic is unmuted. Go ahead, Jackie. Okay, gotta move on. Go ahead, Baker. Your mic's unmuted.
Thank you, SG, for all you do. I appreciate you so much. Look forward to all your files. So today, when Trump took questions in the Oval Office, somebody asked him about the ballroom again, and he went through like all the specs, ballistic ceilings and glass and all that. But then he said, we really need the ballroom because we have to stand in 3 or 4 inches of water when it's so wet there. It's such a wet place. And I was just wondering if you thought that was maybe pointing us to Q post 34. Thank you. God bless. Thank you, Jenny.
Well,
Thank
the
you,
short
Baker.
answer to that is unequivocally yes. And the reason that I feel confident to say that is because if we look at just the last 3 months, just the last 90 days, President Trump has referenced the number 34 no less than 5 times. That is a lot of emphasis being placed on a particular integer, talking to the mainstream press, talking to, the world through Truth Social. And we've also are aware that President Trump has utilized Truth Social pretty obviously in a couple of different formats to highlight that he is Q+. So looking at the emphasis that is being placed on 34, a ballroom is a place of celebration. A ballroom is a place of dancing and making merry and, celebrating ceremony that is more than just your typical happy birthday to you kind of dynamic. The racetrack that they have put out in Washington, D.C. is 1.7 miles in length. And I forget how many laps they said that you have to go in order for it to be a complete circuit, in order for them to count it as a complete circuit. But I know 1.7 front to back is 34, 3.4. So, looking at that emphasis, I am not surprised at all that was said today. I didn't get a chance, like I told Jenny earlier, I didn't get a chance to see the press conference. I'm going to go back and look at some of it. We saw 34 trillion a number of times from President Trump towards the end of last year, referencing investments that have been expected to come into the United States. 34 billion being paid down through tariff money was put out, I think, last summer at some point in time. So, and I do think that a great deal of these integers are pointing us to these drops, because those early drops, if you look at Q as like a cipher, some of those early drops seemed to tell the end of the story before the beginning was even written. There's another Q post that's right along in those early ones talking about how the EAS is going to be activated. That might be Q post 34 actually, but there was another one that spoke about the National Guard and proof that the National Guard was being activated just last year, right before President Trump activated the National Guard to send them to certain arenas of criminality and that were having gang problems and things like that, and they were there to support immigration and deportation operations. He said several times that some of these places had a crime rate of 3.5 out of 100 or 3.5 out of 10. There was one in reference to California right before the Los Angeles operation that occurred, where he talked about 35,000 potential illegals that were in that area. So, looking at all of this, I think that that's a really decent conclusion to draw. But at the same time, those conclusions, we have to sort of wait and see, right? We have to watch how these events progress and play out. If there's more emphasis on it, and then we see the buildup publicly visible towards that event, whatever is going to kick off the content of Q Post 34, then I think we can say that we were sort of on the mark. If we see things begin to run afoul or stall out, maybe the conclusion is to say, well, not quite yet, but close, but either way, the man has kept us pretty well informed from a structural standpoint on what's going to occur here. All of the Q posting last year that he put on his Truth Social, the reference to Obama and the military commission and crimes against humanity and treason and these types of things. He reposted Julie Donuts about 3 or 4 months ago where she stated that you can bet the former president is going to see a military tribunal, and that was put out on President Trump's Truth Social. He keeps sharing information from several Anon accounts on X. I think one of them is called The Skiff, with respect to the 2020 election being just so obviously and patently stolen that it's almost silly at this point to say that it wasn't. So, and all of that has to build us towards an eventuality of some kind. We cannot have a system that is purposefully built with holes in the sieve, right? You wouldn't build a window with a lot of holes in it. That's not a window, that's a cheese grater. And so looking at what we have, I think that that's a good conclusion to draw, but without having seen the conference, it's difficult for me to say conclusively. I'm willing to bet if it was about the ballroom, there was quite a bit more symbolism as well, because again, that ballroom component, they had to get underneath certain portions of the White House foundation. There were a lot of, digging and excavation operations that occurred in the early component of that. We know that the White House itself has been renovated a couple of times by President Trump just in the last 8 to 10 years. So I would be very encouraged to go back and look at that and sort of dive into it a little bit more. I hope that answers the question. It's sort of a long answer to a very simple question, but I didn't want to just say yes, absolutely, because I think at the end of the day, President Trump also uses these odes, these terminologies to keep that structural integrity with those that have the eyes to see. And it's just a matter of maintaining that vision until the rest of the general public is able to acknowledge what's really going on here.
So much.
Thank you, SG. Thank you, Baker, and everybody here. SG is typically with us once a month. So SG, we'll see you back here in a month.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you for having me back as always, Jenny. It's always a great conversation. God bless you, and God bless your audience.
Oh, so much. Thank you for being here. I'm gonna try to get you back in here maybe around my birthday, because the end of April is around my birthday. So that will be a nice gift. So SG, God bless you. Glad you were able to come in, and thank you for all your knowledge and just the time that you spend in doing your research. You are one of my faves, and you're one of the greats out there, giving us great real information and a calm to this crazy storm we're living. So with that, everybody, have a great rest of your night. Come back and see us tomorrow. We've got 3 shows. We got Rob Cunningham, Captain Kyle, and Warren from PPN. So God bless you all. Thank you, SG. Enjoy your son, and have a great evening, everybody.
Good night, all.